Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we're talking about a potential Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom expansion pass. I think that eventually this will come, and I even think there's a great chance it could be announced in an upcoming September Nintendo Direct. But if this does happen, what can we expect from this expansion pass? Will it be exactly like the expansion pass we got for Breath of the Wild, or will it be done a bit differently? That's what we're talking about today. But before we go forward, let me point out that we are still aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. With your help, it just might be possible. So before getting into how I think the expansion pass for Tears of the Kingdom is going to shake out, let me first address why I think it's likely that an expansion pass is coming. Firstly, most Nintendo games get DLC. The new ones that aren't remakes or remasters. Especially when it's one of Nintendo's biggest releases. Let's just think about the biggest games that have come out from Nintendo in the last couple years. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, an expansion pass. Splatoon 3, an expansion pass. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, an expansion pass. Fire Emblem Engage, an expansion pass. There are exceptions though, like for example, Kirby's Forgotten Land. And that might be one of those cases where they just give us Kirby games every single year, sometimes more than once per year, so they just moved on to the next big project. But in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, a game that's quickly rising up the sales rankings, there is so much potential for Nintendo to make a lot of money from paid DLC for Tears of the Kingdom, it would be odd for them to not do so, from a business perspective. And as much content as there is in Tears of the Kingdom, there's nothing wrong with more. So I do think it's likely for these reasons alone. But there are counter arguments to be made. They haven't announced DLC yet, and in the case of Breath of the Wild, they actually announced the DLC before the game came out, and we're already a few months removed from Tears of the Kingdom's release. We even saw a June Nintendo Direct with no mention of DLC. So admittedly, that is a hit in the likelihood of DLC occurring, but my perspective is the reason we haven't gotten DLC announced yet would either have to be that because this game is so much bigger and Nintendo's being very careful about spoilers, they are waiting it out a little bit more, and or, because it could be a combination, it might be tied into how they are planning 2024 and spreading out content going into their next generation with Nintendo Switch 2. They may even want the tail end of the DLC to release close to the release of their next big system so they can use it to really hype up Zelda next big system with a graphics patch and some sort of new expansion to the game. But something that's occurred to me recently that's made me believe that there probably is DLC coming is the lack of any difficulty options in Tears of the Kingdom. You see, had we beaten Tears of the Kingdom and this somehow led to an unlock of a hero mode or a master mode, I would have thought, okay, that idea of hero or master mode, they just pushed it into the base game and there we go. But with Breath of the Wild, there was a master mode. But it came with the first DLC pack of its expansion pass. And we don't have that for Tears of the Kingdom, and it feels odd that it isn't there. This leads me to believe that they are planning something, and we are getting more amiibo for Tears of the Kingdom later down the road. They announced new amiibo after the release for Tears of the Kingdom. I think the plan for Tears of the Kingdom is to help keep this game relevant for some time. It released in May, but they want to give it a big holiday push, which does give me some optimism that we might even get some sort of DLC announcement, if not in a September Direct, potentially at the Game Awards. And even if Switch 2 is not coming out till the end of 2024 or even possibly early 2025 if the reports are wrong, by only announcing and maybe just starting out the DLC at the end of this year, they can stress that towards the launch window of a potential Switch 2. So if anything, I think it makes more sense that they didn't announce it in the previous Direct, and it's becoming increasingly more likely as we get closer to 2024. So I am keeping my eyes peeled for a potential expansion pass announcement during this Direct, but I won't be surprised if we have to wait maybe a few more months. We shall see. But when this hopeful expansion pass is announced, how is it going to be done? Are they going to do it in the exact way they did Breath of the Wild? There were sort of like 3 ways for the expansion pass in Breath of the Wild. There was the expansion pass bonus, which gave you a few new treasure chests that had some neat little things. And then later on, they released DLC Pack 1 a few months after release, and then for the holiday of 2017, they had DLC Pack 2. There may be some sort of expansion pass bonus when they do announce this, but I'm not really expecting that, and even if it's there, it wouldn't be that much of a game changer, I assume. But I am thinking they are going to stick to 2 different packs. The only thing I can kind of see them maybe adding for free is a new hard mode, maybe reintroducing master mode. But depending on how they go about doing this new hard mode might not be free, and it might be treated as something a little bit more significant. So with DLC Pack 1, they added Trial of the Sword and Master Mode along with a few new features. And ultimately, this first pack was mostly about maximizing the enjoyment of the base game and giving you more things to do within that part of the game. So I'm going to think they will do something similar with Tears of the Kingdom. The first pack will be more about embellishing that primary campaign, and that will also include some level of a Master Mode. I don't know if I want to go ahead and predict this, but given that there are only a few dungeons in the game, it wouldn't totally shock me if they go more in a Master Quest route, where they actually change around the structures of the dungeons so it's almost like new puzzles and patterns we have to figure out when we go ahead and do them in a new higher difficulty mode. So maybe this would still include a lot of the things we saw in Master Mode for Breath of the Wild. So tougher enemies with different classes, different enemy arrangements, more platforms and chests to use with these tougher enemies, and regenerating health. But I think they can go a step further and really think about enemy arrangements. Maybe add some side adventures that have a little bit of a story to it that are related to handling surpluses of enemies in particular areas of the world. Maybe there is a stronger class of Gleeok. Maybe they start mixing in Lynels with Moblins together in their camps so they're a bit more challenging. Maybe include more aerial battles, have more Moblins flying around so we have more reason to go into the skies. Maybe there could even be some Gleeoks in the skies that we battle straight up in the air. And the whole idea I have with this, it's mainly about maximizing the fuse and ultra hand abilities we have, because after playing through Tears of the Kingdom, there's just so much we can do, and it feels like with the base game, it's just not enough. I'll go another step further. Once we beat the bosses in the dungeons when they're made available later on, maybe in the depths, they can even mix these up, maybe even throw more enemies together. What if we fight more than one boss at once? So maybe this new hard mode would be something more significant, and in this case, it would make sense for it to be just as a DLC Pack 1, as opposed to just a free update. But because of how significant this might be, maybe they don't add like a Cave of Trials challenge. This would be more focused on remixing the challenge, but if we end up having rearranged dungeons with different types of enemies in different environments, mixing things up all together that are tougher, along with some cool side adventures tying this all together, that might be a fun little update to hold us over until the next big update. And while I wouldn't expect that they would showcase DLC Wave 2 significantly if they were to announce this anytime soon, because this would be like the big sort of expansion that they might want to use to hype up as a quality release or expansion to Tears of the Kingdom alongside a graphics patch for the next system, they could at least announce the intention of there being an expansion story. Now, Breath of the Wild also had a new original story. That's how they touted it initially with DLC Pack 2, and it was nice. We had some additional memories and challenges and an additional dungeon, but it was all within the same world. If the idea with this next expansion is to be something a bit more significant, to excite fans to come back to Tears of the Kingdom, maybe almost a year or more a bit after release, and also as somewhat of an exciting adventure that can stand on its own, so some can still enjoy it on Switch, but others can choose to enjoy it as like a definitive version on Switch too, then I think it's got to be something significant. And when you look at more recent Nintendo games with their DLC expansions, that final big wave is a final big wave. It's something extensive. It's like a whole other adventure. In the case of Xenoblade, their expansion adventures are basically like their own games. In the case of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it straight up was its own game. It had its own physical release, and in terms of how much time it takes to beat these games, in many cases they take more time than other RPGs or adventures, so they are significant things. I wouldn't say that they would be as significant as the entire campaign of For Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but maybe we're talking a 30 to 40 hour experience here, something that's meaty and worthwhile. I think this is a new standard. When Nintendo handled DLC for Breath of the Wild, they were still figuring things out, getting their feet wet here. So really, I would be surprised if they didn't have an expansion adventure that had a whole other new area to explore. And I think that's something that might excite even more people and potentially could even help to bring in more sales for Tears of the Kingdom. Because a common criticism for Tears of the Kingdom is that it feels too samey. It's mostly just exploring the same world. Now, while I really appreciate that they expanded to the depths and the skies, there is still a decent subset of people that wanted more world that is entirely new to explore. Possibly it could be its own separate adventure that you boot into from the main menu, kind of like the Xenoblade games. Or more preferably, it could be integrated into the world. But how would it be integrated into the world? Well, potentially they could literally just add in a massive array of other sky islands, some of which being significant in size, maybe more comparable to the Great Sky Island, which could also double as filling up the sky a bit more, because some people have had some criticisms about that as well, that they felt that the sky isn't significant enough. And if they were to add an entire other region that has its own ecosystem with unique areas to explore, that might excite a lot of people from a few different perspectives. It doesn't necessarily have to be into the skies either. It could maybe be a giant island that appears in the ocean. It could be a whole giant ecosystem that we can discover underground, or something else entirely, maybe expanding the borders of Hyrule somewhat. However they choose to do it, I believe they will add actual new areas to explore that feel very fresh and new compared to the rest of the environment in Tears of the Kingdom. That is my prediction for when we eventually do get Wave 2 of this hypothetical expansion pass for Tears of the Kingdom. Now, what would be the overall gameplay structure and story for this expansion? That's a whole other discussion, maybe a couple, which maybe at some point or another I will get to. But what do you make of my expansion pass predictions up to this point? Do you agree? Do you have different ideas? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.